Hello and welcome to this Load Trek webinar using your TMS to manage drivers, time, and payroll. So thank you for joining us. If you can hear me and if you can see my screen, please enter Y or yes in the chat box. Thank you. And we will begin. Well, I appreciate you guys taking time to join us today. I know everyone's real busy, so I appreciate your time. We'll respect it. We will be taking a couple of questions at the end of this. So to submit a question, type it into the chat queue, or you can email us info@loadtrek.net, info@loadtrek.net, and I'll answer them when we're done. So let's talk a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish here. What we're trying to accomplish, focus today's webinar, is accurate drivers pay. Accurate and simple drivers pay. So why is that important? Seems like kind of a silly question, but let's talk about it anyway. Accurate pay is really important, mainly because it's happier workers. No matter how much your people love working for you, they still like to get paid. And, you know, I'll even use my own example. I've been here for a long time. I really like it around here. If you didn't pay me for a week or two, I'd be okay. But still, in spite of all of that, when you get paid, it's a big deal. Payday is a big deal. And when the pay is accurate, people are happy. When the pay is inaccurate, then they start to kind of lose a little bit of respect for the organization. Now, if it's inaccurate and low, of course, they'll tell you about it. If it's inaccurate and high, then they won't. But reason number one is accurate pay equals happier workers. And reason number two is accurate pay is simpler benefits administration. When you pay certain benefits such as health insurance or such as retirement benefits, a lot of times it's dependent upon the time, the hours, or the pay rate, or the total pay of that employee. So when you have to back out and adjust payroll, it isn't just for the payroll itself, it's also for the benefits. And it can get really complicated resorting and reorganizing the benefits and doing the credits and debits. So, and that's second reason. And third is just keep expenses within budget. In today's environment, it is really important to make sure that your expenses are on track. It's a tight business environment out there, and we have to do everything we can to keep things as much on track as possible. And even if things are a little tight, even if margins are a little tight and a little slim, that can be okay as long as you're not surprised. Surprises are never, well, they're just never good. So let's talk about how this works. So, the first concept we're going to look at is telematics. And I know you didn't sign up for a telematics webinar, but here's the thing. A telematics device is a wonderful thing, and it's used to measure reality. Telematics device is used to measure reality. And a telematics device, telematics is just a word that I guess all of us created to make ourselves sound important. I don't know. But telematics is anything that communicates from a vehicle. And it doesn't have to be a vehicle, but generally it's accepted. Anything that communicates from a remote location, such as a vehicle, back to the office. It can be automated communication, manual initiated communication, or some combination thereof. On the simple end, it can be a GPS system, just a very basic GPS tracker, all the way up to an extensive onboard computer. And many telematics systems in the United States and Canada today have an ELD. So most ELDs, well, I'd say all ELDs these days are telematic systems. Not all telematic systems are ELDs. So telematics measures reality as opposed to a TMS, which And let's talk about a TMS. That stands for Transportation Management System. That's just another three-letter acronym that we call a dispatch system. Back in the day, we called it a dispatch software, dispatch system, and now we added features and we call it a transportation management system, or a TMS. Either way, it does the same thing. A TMS allows you to create a plan, and after the plan is executed, allows you to pay drivers and bill loads. So the TMS gives you the yardstick. Telematics gives you reality. When you marry the two together like you do in LoadTrek, you create a system that gives you reality and the yardstick. Or think about it in spreadsheet terms: actual versus projected, actual versus planned. And when I talk about telematics, it does not have to be an ELD. It can be as simple as an Android tablet. You don't have to get fancy or extensive or expensive. A complete TMS gives you all three aspects of fleet management: planning, execution, and analysis. Let's talk about how it works. Number one, you create a plan that's safe, compliant, and hits your time windows. And whether it's a load or a job or whatever it is, these time windows are when customers expect things to be done. And yes, I understand that customers don't understand all the complexities of the transportation business. That's your job, not theirs. Still, you negotiate. They want it there at 9 a.m. You know that with breaks and resets and hours of service and traffic, it can't be there until 1100 hours. You negotiate something. They agree to it. That's the plan. And you create this plan that is safe. I can do it without speeding or driving recklessly. I can do it without unloading faster than is safe or loading faster than is safe. It's compliant, doesn't exceed any hours of service or Department of Labor regulations. It hits my time windows. That's number one. Number two, when the drivers clock in, key in on their tablet, on their ELD, on their device in the truck, they see their plan, and then they measure their performance against the plan. And as that driver goes about his or her day, they see exactly how they're performing against your plan. It's one of the biggest complaints I hear from drivers, especially new drivers. I don't know what they expect from me. And that's bad. That ambiguity is never good. But here they do know what's expected of them. You're not expected to speed. You're not expected to be out of compliance. You are expected to show up on time. Here's a plan that I believe will allow you to do all of that. And if the driver cannot execute that plan, if there's realities that we didn't see when we were making the plan, then we just adjust the plan. That's all. So you create a plan, drivers see the plan, and then when it's all done, we ensure accurate pay, but we also audit your operations, because payroll is where finance and operations weld together. It's where they overlap. The reason payroll is so complicated is because it's finance and operations in the same department. So the key questions are you paying the correct amount? And if there's a problem, or when there's a problem, why? What happened? So let's look at each of these three steps. Number one, I create a load. I create a plan. Look, it doesn't have to be a load. It could be a job. It could be anything. But I create a plan. This is a very simple two-stop load. One pickup, one delivery. I build it by hand. It took me less than 30 seconds to make it. There are other ways to get loads into the system: automated schedulers, APIs, EDI. There's all sorts of automated ways to get loads in here. But for today's webinar, we're just going to talk about entering a load. So you just enter a load. This is what it looks like. That's a two-stop load. The next one is a little more complicated. This is an 8-stop load with one pickup, 7 deliveries. And you can see this is a very typical urban kind of a pickup and delivery environment. This one happens to be in Columbus, Ohio. This load, if you were to build it by hand, by the way, with 8 stops, would probably take you about 3 or 4 minutes. This is an interesting load, and sometimes you see things like this, and sometimes you see it with like milk tankers. You see it a lot with postal and parcel. LTL And this is a relayed load or stage load where we swap drivers. So what we have here is one pickup. So we have a pickup, and then we go to a relay point where we swap drivers. And then that second driver takes the load on in and makes the 3 deliveries. And in fact, if you ever see the whole picture here, they have a northbound and a southbound truck meeting at exactly the same place at the same time, and at a fueling stop at this Flying J in Carneys Point, New Jersey. The driver of the northbound truck steps out, takes his stuff, and as they're fueling, gets into the southbound truck and vice versa. When I create my plan, which is step 1, then I give it to the driver to execute. So I have a dispatch board here. On the left are my loads. Loads that are in red have not been assigned. Green has been assigned. So I have a lot of red loads. Drivers on the right, if they have no loads beneath their name, and they don't, then they all are available to do work. And it doesn't have to be drivers. It can be owner-operators. It can be contract drivers. It could be other companies. I simply click on a load, dial in the driver, hit the big check box, and I have assigned my loads. So this is what dispatch screen looks like when my loads are assigned. Nothing's in red. Everybody's got a load. On the left are my loads. Blue means they've been assigned but have not been run yet. Green means that they have yet to be run, but they've been assigned. And then if you see the gray, like in that Deerfield, Wisconsin load, gray means that it's been run and billed already. And you see a couple loads here that have blue and green. That just shows you at what stage of the load is complete. And when I click on any of these routes for a driver, here's what I'm looking at. Now, I know this is not something payroll is going to be looking at, but this is something dispatch does look at. And we're going to look at 2 examples here. One of a load that's going according to plan, which means payroll is really easy. And then one that is not going according to plan, which means we have decisions to make in payroll. So this is an on-time load. The origin, which is the terminal location where the driver and truck came from. The origin, stop 1, and stop 2 are completed. They're in blue. Green, stop 3 is next. The driver and the truck are en route, and you can see the green arrow driving up the shore of Lake Michigan there. That's what a job or a route looks like when it's in compliance, on time, being run according to plan, as opposed to this one. This is a route that's running outside your plan, and in this particular case, we're late for stop 2. Stop 2 is up on the north side of St. Louis, and we're late, and you can see that the truck is en route. So we've looked at step 1, we've looked at step 2, we've planned and we've dispatched our work, we've tracked our work, we're communicating with the drivers, both automated, using GPS and manual for any anomalies that might happen, and now we're off to our last, third and final step, which is approve and pay the driver. So check this out. What we're looking at here is a driver timesheet. And on the left are my list of drivers. The drivers that are in red are those with unapproved payroll time. So if the driver's in red, we have time within those date ranges that I've dialed in up at the top, time that needs to be validated. So let's talk about what that looks like. Circled in red is kind of the heart of the whole thing. Hours. First column is hours. How long did it actually take for this driver to perform the work? And the answer is, on this particular day for that particular customer, 10.5 hours. Next column is bench. What is the bench? That is my expected time. When I gave the driver that load, I expected it to take 11 hours. It took the driver 10.5. So the driver beat my expectations by 30 minutes. That's wonderful. And then that third column is really interesting. That's the plan. That's what the customer asked for. The customer thought they gave you 8.5 hours of work. That's what their schedule called for. Now, look, I know that they don't really pay you by the hour. Sometimes they pay you by the mile. Sometimes they do pay you by the hour. Sometimes it's hundredweight. Sometimes by the gallon. Whatever. The point is, based on the customer scheduling, they think they gave you 8.5 hours, but by the time I added my portal time, my STEM time, pre-trip, and getting the truck and the driver from the terminal to the first stop, post-trip, getting my driver, getting my truck from the last stop back to the terminal. Off-duty periods of time, break times in the middle of my tour of duty. That's all portal and STEM time. The customer did not have built into their equation, but I had to. So we got paid for 8.5 hours. By the time I got done making this into a load, it became 11 hours, and the driver did it in 10.5. That's perfect. If you need more information, focus your eyes down below on the graph. And let's talk about these graphs real quick. The first graph represents the hours of service. Look, you don't have to have an ELD to run the system. And if you do, you don't have to hook it up. But that graph does represent the driver's time. That's the driver's timeline of activity, where green represents off-duty, red represents on-duty, not driving, periods where the driver is on duty but the truck or the vehicle is not moving, and then blue is moving. So we can see where the driver clocked in, did the pre-trip at the origin, drove, and made each of the 8 stops and went back to the destination, which is the yard, and then clocked off duty. Below that, in blue, I have blue shaded areas that either look like a dot or an oval or kind of a long oval. That is the planned. That is the planned stops and the duration of the stop on this same timeline. O stands for origin. Numbers 1 through 8 stand for each of the 8 stops. D stands for destination. In other words, home terminal at the beginning, home terminal at the end, and any pre- and post-trip activities that happen in there. You'll see that big green 45-minute break in the middle. That is a intra-tour break time. So below the blue dots, which is my plan, the green is my actual. You can see visually the plan and the actual. And you can see how we started to run behind at the first stop, got a little further behind at the second and third stops, even further behind at the fourth and fifth stops, but we made up a lot of time at the fifth stop. And by the time I hit the 7th stop, I was back on time. And when the driver made it back to the yard, was actually a little bit ahead of schedule. So that's a visual representation of planned versus actual, laid out in a timeline format where you can visually match it up with the vehicle movement. So far, so good. If we need to do any sort of exception reporting for things that happen on the road that may not have been planned and maybe can't easily be seen here, we add what we call exceptions. This first exception is an example of a reimbursement. This allows you to track reimbursements. In this particular case, unreimbursed hotel time. Next that we're looking at here is we're tracking a delay. This is a delay track by type and by approval status. And by approval status, the supervisor can suggest it, for example, but the payroll administrator has to approve it. You know, set up those sorts of schemas if you like. In this particular case, a 15-minute delay waiting on the inbound driver. It's an explanation of why there was more time in there than what I anticipated. And then lastly is a daily minimum. If there's a minimum number of hours a day or a week that you agree to pay a certain driver, this is where you can dial it in. If I agree to pay an 8-hour a day minimum, but I only work the driver 6, I can dial in my 8-hour minimum. When we're done and when we're happy, when the supervisor approves the payroll, you click validate, and it goes away just like that. And what you're looking at here is a payroll report. This is a list of approved drivers' pay. This list can be printed, although most people don't do that, but you can do it old school, print it out, and just go off the list. You can save it as a CSV, export it, save it as a CSV, so you can manipulate it in Excel or Access, something like that. You can export it to another payroll service, or you can send it automatically via an API to another payroll service. So let's talk about getting started. If you don't have an ELD, you can use any Android tablet, or if you have an ELD, you just choose not to hook it up, you can use any Android tablet. Visit the self-serve portal to get started, signup.loadtrek.net. Signup.loadtrek.net. If you do have an ELD, email us, info@loadtrek.net. That's info@loadtrek.net. So at the beginning of this, we asked for some questions, and let's see what we have. We have time for two. And so the first question is, what devices can access LoadTrek? Well, there's a lot of them. Essentially, any device running Android that isn't locked, in other words, isn't restricted to only one or two programs, any device running the Android operating system that allows us in some form or fashion to download the LoadTrek app can run LoadTrek. Further, there are 3 ELDs that have LoadTrek as native to them, that allow LoadTrek to natively operate within them, but you don't really run the LoadTrek screens. You actually run the ELD screen. So email us info@loadtrek.net, and I can go into detail on that. Time for one more question. Well, this is kind of related. My ELD does not allow integration, and that's true. Most of them do not. There's roughly 300 ELDs out there, and we have not seen all 300 ELDs, but most of them do not allow integration, and that's fine. Just use an inexpensive, off-the-shelf Android tablet. So thank you for joining us. If you're interested in LoadTrek, come check us out. We've been doing this since 2003. Our job is to put fleet information in one place, on one screen, in one dashboard to run as much of your fleet as possible. We love the opportunity to talk to you. Here's how you get a hold of us. Our website's loadtrek.net. Our email address is info@loadtrek.net, and you can call us 877-226-0107. That's 877-226-0107. My name's Joel. You can reach me at extension 2. Thank you for joining us today, and have a good afternoon.